If we want to fire up the energy transition, excuse the pun, we must identify and finance the most promising technologies. And although this pursuit does come with its own set of challenges, which can sometimes be technological, sometimes even geopolitical, it does promise exciting opportunities for investors. To discuss all of this, we are delighted to have Gerard Reid, a renowned voice globally on the energy transition. Gerard is a co-founder and partner at Alexa Capital and hosts the very popular Redefining Energy podcast. Welcome to the Commodity Exchange, a podcast where we bring you insights from the world of commodities. Whether you are an investor or just want to learn more about the topic, this podcast is for you. I'm Mobeen Tahir, Director Macroeconomics and Thematic Research at WisdomTree.
And I'm Nitesh Shah, Head of Commodities and Macroeconomic Research here at WisdomTree.
Before we begin, I do need to state the following to clarify: the views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of WisdomTree and in this episode, Gerard Reid, and are subject to change. Anything we present in this podcast is not intended to be relied upon as a forecast, research, nor as investment or tax advice. The information and opinions expressed in this podcast are not a recommendation, offer, or solicitation to buy or sell any securities, and reliance upon them is at the sole discretion of the viewer. Please remember, past performance is no indication of future results. And with that, let me pass it over to you, Nitesh, to kick us off.
Thank you, Mobeen. So welcome, Gerard. It's a pleasure to have you on our show. Mobeen mentioned a couple of the hats that you wear, but I understand you wear many different hats. And why don't you tell our audience a little bit about what you do in your own podcast, Alexa Capital, and some of the other projects you have on?
Yeah, listen, I suppose there's three parts of my business life. I suppose the first one is really, I come from the finance industry, and I'm a partner in a business called Alexa Capital, which is one of the leaders in Europe in and around corporate finance in this energy transition space. That means we're raising money for companies, we're selling projects, and we're doing M&As. That's my first hat. The second hat really is I'm involved in scaling businesses. I think this is a unique opportunity in our lifetime now to really, to have a really big impact by creating new things that actually have a positive impact on our world. And as the third thing that I do is I realize that the energy transition is really complicated. It is not easy to change an energy transition, and we're trying to move the energy transit. By energy transition, I mean we're trying to move from a fossil fuel-based system to a clean energy-based fuel system. That's not easy, and it's not easy for lots and lots of reasons. And it's also because it's so complex. I just decided, look, and this is probably about 10 years ago. I said I'm just going to help educate people and give them an independent view on what was going on. So I've been a very active blogger, and obviously I have a podcast, and I'm also involved in a think tank called the Energy Transition Forum. And again, I do this because, again, it's complex, and, I think it's important.
That's great. So, I think a lot of our audience is familiar with the energy transition, given the number of shows we've dedicated to the topic. But we'll always have new listeners. So why don't you tell us a little bit in your own words about what you believe the transition is, and more importantly, tell us why you think this mega trend presents an attractive investment opportunity.
Okay, so let's take a step back, right? I by accident got into the whole renewable space 20 years ago. I had an investment client who asked me to look at a solar business, and I came back to him and said, don't invest. And he said to me, why? And I said, well, the economics of solar make zero sense and never will. And he said to me, Gerard, I need you to meet the founder. And I actually met the founder of the business, and the founder really explained to me why solar was going to revolutionize the world. And it actually is in the process of doing that, right? When you think this year, for example, we're going to have 500 gigawatts of solar installed across the world. We've never seen an energy technology come to market as quick as this. Never, right? You think of it, nuclear at the peak in its 70s, you were probably building, 30, 40 gigawatts a year, right? So just to put that out of sight, that's the first point I say. But let's see where this came from. This technology would really not have got to market and to scale without a whole pile of subsidy programs, in the United States, in Spain, in Italy, in Germany, and also with the help of the Chinese. The Chinese have produced and scaled the technologies like we've never seen in the history of mankind. And the subsidy programs in a lot of the Western countries, what they did was they nailed what was a very expensive product to get to market so that there was a market for it and the prices went down. That was the start of it. So for me, at the beginning, it really was part of the green movement and a little bit about cleaning up the environment, stuff like this. For me, 20 years on, it's not about that anymore. And I don't use the word transition anymore. It's not a transition, it's a revolution. And in the revolution, businesses, people die, right? And there's winners and losers. And we're seeing the beginning of that already. And that makes it, by the way, a difficult place to invest. Right? Just think of it like this, energy. You look at some of the valuations of some of the oil companies, the gas companies out there, you could actually say, from a historical point of view, they're trading at multiples, very low multiples. Why? Well, there's a little bit of caution about the future in those businesses, right? And then, say, well, okay, let's put money in a solar business. And then you look and say, well, the margins of those businesses are so low. Do we really want to be in that? So it's a difficult place to invest. But I just want to say it's a difficult place to invest because there's a revolution going.
Excellent. So our observations at Wisdom Tree was that this energy transition, what you call a revolution, gained a lot of momentum and traction with investors back in 2021, 2022. But that cooled substantially in 2023. However, just as you say, the investments in the physical assets in clean energy are now close to double those in fossil fuels, when they were kind of equal in 2016. And solar adoption has clearly eclipsed most people's imaginations a decade ago, you including. There seems to be a huge dichotomy there. The energy transition or revolution seems to be powering ahead, but investors seem less interested. Is this what you see as well, or and why do you think that's the case?
I won't say it's less interested. I think what's happened is that what we've had is a Chinese government who made a strategic decision 15 years ago that they had to dominate these new energy technologies. And what do I mean by that? I mean, China doesn't have its own gas, doesn't have its own oil, and has to import them. In particular, oil is really a big bottle, the biggest oil importer in the world. And they look at this from a strategic point of view and they say, we don't really want to be continuing to import this, number one. Number two is there also is a view from the Chinese government really that they believe they should be at the center of the world. And if you're at the center of the world, then actually you need to do good things for the world. And so the good thing for the world is could do something for the environment and lead on that. And then the third thing that is related to that is industrial policy in China. So centralized industrial policy, which means that, they've got full support to go and scale and I'll take it a 10-year view. A lot of companies in the West take 6-month view these days, right?
Yeah.
So we've never seen anything like that in terms of companies. Now, the result of this is that you've got massive capacities of solar panels, wind turbines, batteries, inverters, you name it, the core components of this energy transition. And they're all made by Chinese companies. And by the way, these Chinese companies, we never heard of them 15 years ago, right? And now I look and I go, Goldwind, Envision, biggest wind turbine manufacturers in the world, CATL, BYD, biggest battery manufacturers in the world, BYD, biggest EV manufacturer in the world. You can go on and on and on about what China has done. But what China has done is, and also does, is they say, listen, if we're going to really dominate these technologies, we have to get to such scale that people aren't going to compete with us or can't compete with us. Because people like me in the finance world say, I'm not going to give you the capital. So the result of that really is we don't have manufacturing of any of these core technologies in the Western world, with the exception really of Tesla. Okay? With the exception of Tesla. The rest is is in China. And that's what makes it very difficult to invest. How do you compete with the Chinese, right? And you can say, I can put a subsidy on it, I can do this, that, and the other thing, but do investors really like putting money in a factory just because you're going to get a subsidy knowing that you won't compete with it? You know what I mean? I think that's what makes it very difficult. And the other thing is that you have hype circles in this space. And you talked about 2021, 2022, massive hype cycle. The world's hydrogen. Hydrogen is going to be the next big thing. And we're the leaders in it. And we've got Plug Power, and we've got Ballard, and we got this. And their share prices have all collapsed. Okay. And also, by the way, we had the whole SPAC movement as well. Again, crazy valuations in and around companies that had nothing or very little. And you have a crash, which is probably similar in this space to the crash, the internet boom and bust. To put really clear, out of the internet boom and bust came a whole pile of great businesses, right, including Amazon, right? So I'm not negative about it. I'm just saying you just have to. There's an opportunity now to pick winners.
Gerard, speaking of hype cycles, one thing that's very hyped up right now is the AI wave, certainly. And I saw a statistic recently from the International Energy Agency, which said that one query submitted to ChatGPT requires 10 times the amount of energy as a simple Google search. It's a good, memorable way to just remember how energy intensive the AI revolution is. And of course, with more data centers having to be deployed, more devices with AI capabilities and so forth. But this also potentially has an impact on the energy transition, because potentially some of those data centers could turn towards renewables, and maybe that's a new source of demand. How do you see the impact and the increased use of energy from the AI revolution on the energy transition?
I look at it very positively. Okay. I look at it very positively. And the reason I say that is because it's all about electricity, right? And what any form of data center or software does it, and power electronics, enables you to control power flows. And I can see data centers being part of the solution going forward. And let me explain what I mean by that is, well, what happens when, I can tell you, like I'm in Europe, I put in ChatGPT. If I use ChatGPT in my morning, it's really quick. I go and use it in the evening, it's really slow. Why is that? Well, because we're using US data centers in the morning, and guess what? You're all asleep. And then when you guys all wake up, then guess what happens? It gets slow. Now, where am I coming from on this? That's already happening within this, which is you're moving demand in data centers based on where you have capacity. But I'm also going to come to another point. You're going to do this also based on electricity. So where's the cheap electricity? Oh, yeah, there's too much wind in the UK. Let's go there. So we're going to flexibilize a lot of what we're seeing from the Googles and the Microsoft of this world. We're going to use them as part of the solution. And I'm very happy about the fact that these guys are actually putting their hands up and saying, we're going to lead this. We're going to do this. They're not shying away and sort of saying, oh, yeah, we're going to just buy carbon credits and keep our heads down. They're actually putting their heads up and saying, we're going to be part of the solution. And tech is part of the solution, right? So that's what I want to say on that whole issue. And it's very clear. If you look at who the big energy users going forward are, it used to be the big chemical companies, right? It was Dow, it was BASF. It's not. I mean, the big electricity users going forward are Google, Microsoft, etc., right? And we have to make sure that they're part of this solution going forward rather than the problem, right? And the other thing I would say is, if you want to think about cleaning up our energy system, you have to electrify as much as you can. And electrifying as much as you can means actually that what you need to move into a world is where everything is connected together. And it is powered by AI, right? So, I can walk into the house. Guess what? The house senses that I'm there and the heating system goes on. And then it actually goes, oh, but by the way, there's no sun out there today, so we're not going to charge your car. I don't want to think about that, but an AI will enable decisions like that to be made and automated going forward. And that's the world that we're going into. And by the way, that lends itself very well to, let's call it, flexible side of renewables, because the reality is solar is the cheapest form of electricity producer in the world. But the problem is it's not there at night. Well, guess what? We don't use our data centers at night, right? Right. So there's ways around it. That's what I want to say. I think I look at it positive. I don't look at it as negative in any way.
Another sector that is electrifying very quickly, and you just said it, is cars that need to be charged, electric vehicles. And they too receive their own, go through their own ebb and flow in terms of the press they receive. Of course, recently there's been some negative press, perhaps more so out of the US, where EV adoption might be a bit slower compared to parts of Europe or indeed China. But the world at large, overall, we're on track to sell 17 million EVs in 2024. And if you compare that to 2020, we saw close to 3 million sales. So we're on this very strong growth trajectory, certainly in the electrification of road transportation. Give us your take on how you see the EV industry. Is it breaking or is it accelerating?
Oh, it's accelerating. And by the way, it's a little bit like the solar industry in the past. What you tended to have was a boom of 3 years. And then what would happen would slow down. It might even go almost negative or flat, and then it accelerates again. But there is always one market up and one market down. That's the way it is, right? So yeah, okay, the German market is down this year. So what? The Chinese market is up this year, right? Okay, so I think the trend is very, very, very clear. And I think the most interesting thing for me in and around EVs is, if you think what's happened is EVs manufacturers have focused on the upper end of the market. So if you think of a Tesla, it started at a Model S, and the cars are pretty expensive. And it's normally, right? That's what you do when you bring a new technology to market. You go at the upper end and you try to make as much margin as possible. Okay, well, we've seen in the last year 40% reduction in the cost of batteries. Okay, have we seen 40% reduction in the price of EVs? No. Why not? Because, BYD and Tesla actually have very strong margins in this business, and that actually enables them to keep that. Yes, they can push down prices if they want, but the point about it is they don't necessarily need to do that yet. And there's the point I'm also making is there is more room for prices to go down at these EVs. And so the parity between EVs and internal combustion engine at the upper end of the market is there already. And for those of you who, are buying an expensive car, I mean, I just look at myself. I'll never go back to internal combustion engine. When I've got a car that does 350, miles or over 500 kilometers in range, it's sort of game over for me already. And if I look at the driving experience of these cars and compare them to the old cars, just no way. So you can't stop it. That's what I was just saying. As I said, we've been trying to improve the internal combustion engine for 100 years at this point in time. And we've got the law of diminishing returns set in a long, long, long while ago, while you have on the opposite in the EV space, which is you still have technology improvements and cost reductions going forward. So my own view is it's really unstoppable at this point in time.
And I guess you only have to look at China as an example for that, right? I mean, the compact and small cars are already cheaper in EV format in China than they are in internal combustion engine format, right? So I guess it's already written the blueprint for the rest of the world.
And Nitesh, you're totally right on that already. And by the way, but there's a cultural thing in China versus the West that we need to understand. In the West, we've had internal combustion engines for 100 years. And people really love them, right? It's part of the culture of society, right? Now, China doesn't have that. And everybody is used to, for the last 15 years, driving around in electric scooters where, you had extension cables coming out, balconies down to charge a car. So everybody has had that experience of it. Now, we would never do this in the West. You go, what? You want me to put an extension cable down to power my scooter? For them, it was normal. So for them to then go from an electric scooter to an electric vehicle, it's just normal. For them to go to an internal combustion engine, which is noisy, dirty, and a different experience, it's not. That's for them a step backwards, right? So to just think of the mentality and what they've done with, and that's why in the first half of 2024, 50% of Chinese used car sales were hybrid, as in, with a large battery, and are fully electric, right? So yes, they're ahead. They're ahead in adoption, but they're also ahead in production, right?
So, looking at your website for Lexa Capital, you have what I call a book, 150-page book on called "Investing in the Energy Storage Revolution." Give us a little summary. Tell us why you think energy storage is so important in a world of renewables, and where do you think the storage revolution will lead to the most opportunities?
Okay, so Nitesh, basic principle in human development is all around energy storage. Okay, you build a gas terminal, that's energy storage, a coal bunker, a fridge. These are all means to store energy, and they have driven mankind for, in particular, the last 150 years. The innovation in energy storage is incredible. So if I look in the last 15 years, there's one technology, one storage technology that's revolutionized our world, and it's called a lithium-ion battery. Okay, we could not, our modern lives are dependent on a mobile phone that has one of those batteries in it. And I can go on and on and on about, where batteries are. I think I counted in my own home, in the region of 400 batteries in the home at this point in time, lithium-ion batteries. And then so that's the first point. The second point, though, is that if you want to go and see what's happened in terms of lithium-ion in the last, say, decade, what's happened is performance improvements, cost reductions has opened up new markets. So if we talked 10 years ago and said, Gerard, do you think we're going to actually electrify aviation? I would have laughed at you. I'm not laughing anymore. And the reason is because I'm looking at what's going on in batteries. I'm seeing the innovations in and around motors and power electronics. And I go, not only possible, but, you can see already there's a pathway to, not just drones, but short distance airplane rides being electric. And it's not because it's, of climate. It's because of technology change and because the economics of it make a lot of sense. And I always say that's where I'm going for. We go forward and we say, okay, storage prices keep going down. Well, what does that mean? Well, at some point in time, you might say, well, if I'm sitting in Nigeria today and I don't have electricity, the Nigerian government have a decision to make. Do they continue building out the power grid the way we've built it? Or maybe they go, maybe we won't do that because it's a bit expensive. Let's actually go and put in solar and batteries, right? Let's think about it in a different way, right? And I said lithium-ion batteries, but I said energy storage broader because there is a huge amount of innovation taking place in that whole wider energy storage space. And again, every energy transition needs some form of storage, right? You think of it moving from the horse and cart to the Ford Model T. Well, you couldn't do this without, the gasoline infrastructure being put in place, right? So as it stands now, as we're moving from a world where we burnt everything through internal combustion engines, or burnt whatever it is for heat purposes, we're now moving to a world where you're electrifying. So that means we're going to have to find other ways to electrify, right? And there's, as I said, massive innovation taking place in that wider storage area. And that's why I think everybody needs to look at it.
That's really interesting. I mean, when you sort of developed that answer, I was thinking back to the energy crisis that started in 2022 in Europe with the Russia-Ukraine war. We used to gas flowing on tap, and then suddenly we had to stop that because of Russian supply and go to storage of gas, firstly through shipment from liquefied natural gases. So I guess there's some similarities. So are you saying that when countries, and there are a lot of countries who are at a much earlier phase of development at the moment, that don't have a big grid infrastructure at the moment, if they are planning their energy needs for the next 20 years, they're better off focusing on storage and combining with renewables. Is that sort of indication?
I would say they have to rethink the way we build an energy system, and just take a point that the energy system that we have in place, the electricity system that we have in place today, was designed over 150 years ago, ultimately, right?
Yeah.
So why should we use an 150-year-old design? You should look at it in a different way, and I guarantee that you'll come up with a quicker way to electrify society and a lower cost way. Okay? That's where I'm coming from. And storage and solar are going to be really critical parts of that, but there are other technologies as well, right? But, you know, those two are obviously, just from a commercial point of view, these technologies are commercial straight away, and they're just getting cheaper.
And do you think there's enough battery building capacity for that new paradigm?
Yeah, listen, yeah, absolutely, I do. Yeah. I'm not worried about the capacity in the market or anything like that. No issue whatsoever. I'm not worried about the materials either. There was obviously concerns in and around cobalt at some point in time, but if you actually look, you know, the market moved very quickly away from cobalt, and if you look at the materials that are used in a battery, there's a lot of them out there, right? And there's a lot of, in particular, lithium obviously is a core. Lithium, there's a lot of lithium coming out there. I would have even maybe been concerned a little bit about copper, because it takes quite a while to get copper mines on the line, onto the market. But you're also seeing innovation in the mining space, right? If you think of it, like, it's when you really think about it, in the oil and gas space, you've had shale. What is that? It's decentralized drilling. Well, we're sort of moving to the same thing in the mining space as well, right? There's just huge innovation in that area that we're not even thinking about. So I'm also very positive in and around that. And if you take the bigger picture of it, there's a lot of criticisms. Again, where do you get all the materials from? Oh my God, it's not very sustainable. And this kind of thing. You go, well, sorry, that's actually not true, because we're going to reuse 95% of these materials again. So you're actually going to get a point where at some point you won't need to actually take any more stuff out of the ground. And if I compare that to whatever, if I'm talking about coal or gas or what, you just keep taking it out of the ground. You have to keep drilling, right? Every year. You can't reuse it. So it's also, from a sustainability point of view, actually these technologies are very, very, very interesting. You know? And again, if you take the solar panel, what is solar? It's basically silicon. It's a lump, it's sand, right? And there's some silver in it and some other stuff that you can also recycle. And these products last a long while, right? You put a solar panel up on a roof, and it'll be working 30 years later, right? So very simple technologies, very scalable. That's what we like, right?
Gerard, so I guess we're certainly seeing a lot of investment in things like solar and wind, which I think it would be fair to say have become mainstream energy technologies. But there are other innovations that aren't necessarily mainstream, but do have great decarbonization potential if done correctly. You know, things like biofuels, hydrogen, carbon capture, and so forth. Do you think the world is striking the right balance at this point in time between investing in these mainstream energy transition technologies like wind and solar, and looking at these other emerging technologies that have great potential as well?
In some ways, a lot of these technologies are a distraction, because if we have the technologies out there, we should just implement them as quick as possible. And I'm not saying that you don't put money into carbon sequestration and all that type of stuff. That's fine. But the economics of it are just so far away. And also, I would argue that I don't see any revolutions in those areas. I don't see a revolution in hydrogen. I don't see a revolution in the nuclear space. Okay? But I'm not saying that we don't need them. I'm just saying I don't see the revolutions in those areas. If you ask me, what could I get wrong in my view of the world? I think you probably see something like geothermal. will be the one that could be the outsider. And the reason for that is geothermal, at the end of the day, you're just taking heat from the ground and using it. And you're probably going to be using it to heat water. So you could use it in a heating system or something like that, or you could use it in a turbine if it's warm enough. But why that's really interesting is because what have we been doing? What's the revolution in the last 10 years? The biggest revolution in energy in the last 10 years is shale oil and gas drilling. It's drilling technologies, right? And those drilling technologies can be brought into the geothermal space. And I think that could be really, really, really interesting. That's the one I put my money on, where I really keep an eye on. I say, that could be the one that really is an outsider that could be sort of part of this revolution and could have a very, 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 very big impact.
So at Wisdom Tree, Gerard, we see a lot of investors accessing the energy transition opportunity via the commodities route. Now, everything we want to do with the energy transition, building solar power, wind energy, and so forth, all of that is enabled by the raw materials, which are commodities. How do you see the investment opportunity in the world of commodities as it relates to the energy transition?
Well, be really clear, Mobeen. That's how I also invest. I invest in the commodities, right? Because remember what I just said, if we started when I said it's very difficult to invest in companies that are trying to compete with China. And there's a lot of companies in the Western world that are trying to compete but don't have a competitive advantage. So if you look in the mining space at the materials that are needed in this transition, it's without a doubt a very interesting place to look at, right? If you think just take the case of silver, you could invest in silver because of the fact that it's a precious metal like gold. Now, I don't. I look at it and go, it's a precious metal, and its biggest industrial use is now solar panels, and that market's just going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. So that's why I take the view on that, right? And I would also say the same with lithium, right? You look at it and you say, we are going to use lithium for the next 10 years. So it's a growth opportunity for 10 years for any lithium mining company, right? Just no way around it, right? And again, you can go and look at the other battery metals in a similar way. So that's the way I do look at the world. So definitely, I'm totally with you now. I would say that there's not enough money going into those areas. That's the concern I would have a little bit, right? It's just that people look at them and go, oh, they're dirty. So you've got a whole pile of sustainable funds, and I don't see them having Rio Tinto on in their portfolio or anything like that. But, we have to realize that these are really, we can't do this without taking stuff out of the ground.
It's interesting you mentioned silver. I came across an article a few weeks ago indicating that Samsung has built a new solid-state battery technology that uses a lot of silver. So in addition to all the uses that we got in photovoltaics, which as you point out is the biggest industrial source of silver demand, we're probably going to have batteries also competing for that space, if this is true. I'm curious to see whether you have any intel on whether that battery, solid-state battery,
no.
uses this silver.
Well, let's be clear. You're going to use more and more silver in electric cars, right? So there's no doubt silver is going to be used increasingly going forward, right? As I said, I'm invested in it, so I'm a believer, right?
Yeah. I guess an extension of that is, battery technology, as you pointed out, was largely lithium-ion technology, which is really revolutionized things. But within the lithium-ion battery, there's lots of shifts in the technology. You mentioned earlier nickel and cobalt heavy chemistries are shifted towards lithium iron phosphate technologies. We're probably going to see a lot more shifts in the future, possibly to the solid state. How do you think we could go about identifying potential winners of tomorrow, or is that just a fruitless task? And just is there something to go in terms of investing in big baskets of commodities or the equities involved in the space?
I can only tell you that what I did in the past, and I went through a period where I was investing heavily in the battery metals, and I did well, and then I got too stuck in my work to actually put the work in. But I was in cobalt really, really early, and the reason I was in cobalt was because I understood that these high performance cars needed cobalt going forward, right? I then didn't do the research I needed to do, and guess what? Then suddenly we had lithium iron phosphate, right? The Chinese did amazing innovation in this area, right? To really bring the energy performance of these batteries up almost to the level of the cobalt batteries, but to do it at a much lower cost. So the only thing I can say is you have to really look at what the science guys are doing and what the Samsung, and they do this. They're all putting out, technology reports, and they're giving you direction of where they're going, what they're thinking, and all that type of stuff. There's 4 or 5 big battery manufacturers, and you need to follow them closely and see what's on their roadmaps, right? That's what I would say in terms of that. But what is clear is that lithium is there, and lithium is there to stay. I don't see anything displacing it for another decade. What is clear, and the reason I said it is because there's so much room for improvement, right? If you just take on the anode side of the battery, you move into more and more silicon, which is cheap, and it also gives better performance. There's stuff like that going on. There's roadmaps you can see. You talked about solid state batteries. A lot of talk about that, Nitesh. I think you're still a decade away from really having commercial products there in the market, except for, I think there's probably some interesting niche markets for that, first mover products for that, markets for that. But I think it's very early, in my view.
Gerard, you host the podcast Redefining Energy. It's a podcast I would strongly recommend to our audience, for those who haven't listened to it yet and are interested in the topic. Before we let you go, I'd just love for you to, for our audience, just give us your take on what sort of topics you would like to think more deeply on the energy transition going forward. What are you looking forward to exploring a bit further, whether it's on your podcast or in just your work in general? And where can our audience find you, whether it's web links or social media accounts?
Well, let's just start with myself. If you want to find me, just find me on LinkedIn, right? And just feel free to reach out to me, right? I'm available for, I'm available for interesting discussions with people, and I'm also quite happy to, as I said, I really want to get involved in scaling business and help in this transition. So if I can help people with that, I'm more than happy to have a conversation. So in terms of what really interests me going forward, what interests me really is being able to make sure I have a good understanding of what's going to happen going forward and what the best paths are. I really think that the areas that are of great interest to me is what do we do in decarbonizing buildings and decarbonizing industry. I think they're the real interesting things going forward. It's not about building solar or wind parks anymore. It's done. It's easy to do. But how do we take a building and improve energy efficiency in it and improve energy performance? How do we do the same in industry? How do we make sure that this energy transition is low cost, just, and enables us to have a competitive advantage? They're the areas that I really, really want to focus on. And I tell you, if I look at what I love in terms of conversations, I just want to have good conversations with entrepreneurs and people who are really interested in this space, wherever they are in the world. That's for me important, right? Because it's a global transition. As I said to you, it's a revolution, a technology revolution, and we have a lot to learn from each other, and we need to share those learnings with each other.
Excellent. And we look forward to having more such conversations, Gerard. Thank you so much for your insights today. It was a great conversation. We enjoyed it. And we thank everyone for tuning in. We hope everyone enjoyed this episode of the Commodity Exchange. If you want to hear more from us, please do subscribe on whichever platform you're using. And please take a moment to leave us a 5-star rating. You can follow us on LinkedIn or X at niteshshahwt and at mobeentahirwt, or follow Wisdom Tree on these platforms. And if you want to learn more about commodities, visit Wisdom Tree's website, where we have a wide range of research materials and insights. See you all next time.